Part 68. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 671. Chapter 671. The Queen's move will be extraordinary. Fan Qinjiao and Bailey Fengming changed their clothes, then went out and walked towards the main hall of Fenji Palace. Along the way, the palace people did not dare to show off their dignity, and those who did not know better thought they were going to be thieves. Fan Qinjiao was really embarrassed when he saw it. There is really no need to do this, she and Bailey Fengming are not that pretentious. In fact, what Fan Qinjiao didn't know was that not only the palace residents of Fenji Palace had to hold their breath and concentrate, but also the princes and concubines who came to pay their respects to the queen were all worried, for fear of breathing too much. He was so rude that he made the queen unhappy. However, the princes and concubines said they had no idea why they were doing this. As soon as they entered the gate of Fenji Palace, they looked at the palace people inside as if they were floating. The queen was afraid of making noise, so they naturally started to be cautious. But it was not until the appearance of Fan Qinjiao and Bailey Fengming that the princes and concubines kneeling in the main hall were enlightened. Why is the queen so afraid of noise? It's simply that the crown princess and the prince are afraid of quarreling and fighting each other. For a time, the princes and concubines who came to pay their respects to the queen had mixed feelings. They are also daughters-in-law. Look at the queen, the mother-in-law, and then look at their mothers-in-law. There is really no comparison at all. Yun Yu, who followed a group of princes and concubines who came to pay their respects, looked at this scene and her eyes almost popped out. If she remembered correctly, Fan Qinjiao and the prince were not married yet. Even if it is an engagement, what if it is announced to the world? Before you go through the door, you should observe the proper etiquette. Such a truth, how could the queen, who is the lord of the sixth palace, not understand? Not only did the queen protect her, but she also condoned it and spread the news widely. Yunyu's heart twitched because she knew very well that without the tacit approval of her father, how could the queen dare to do this? Yunyu's heart became very upset when she thought that her father's preference for Bailey Rongs was being divided bit by bit. Fan Qinjiao didn't expect that he would encounter such a scene as soon as he entered the door. Instead, he was standing at the door, neither entering nor entering. Bailey Fengming actually didn't think it was anything, but seeing Fan Qinjiao stop, he stopped too. Queen Zhen 11 knew that Fan Qinjiao was shy, so she hurriedly smiled and waved to her and Bailey Fengming, "You worked so hard in the imperial study today, and both of you fell asleep while talking, but you are not married after all. I always felt that it was not good in this palace, so I went to ask the emperor for instructions. Fortunately, the emperor has always been open-minded, and he felt sorry for the two of you. As long as the queen takes action, it will definitely be extraordinary." Just one sentence not only dragged the emperor down, but also sprinkled some salt on Yunyu's wounds. Yunyu's expression changed. "For the one who hurts." After hearing this, among the other princes and concubines, who would dare to say another word? It's better not to humiliate yourself, pretending to be dead is the only option. Fan Qinjiao followed Bailey Fengming into the palace, and suddenly saw Pan Yulu in the crowd. If I remember correctly, Pan Yulu probably hasn't had a miscarriage yet. Pan Yulu felt sad in her heart when she noticed Fan Qinjiao's gaze. Fan Qinjiao was favored by the prince, but she was walking on thin ice in the Three Emperors' mansion. After Bailey Rongs was banned by the emperor, Pan Yulu received a summons from concubine Yu and asked her to enter the palace for a banquet. Pan Yulu knew very well that the third prince was grounded. If she even hid in the mansion and did not come to increase her presence, I am afraid that the third prince would really be forgotten by everyone. It's one thing to know, but it's another thing to be forced to come by concubine Yu. Especially when she saw the empress doting on Fan Qinjiao so much, Pan Yulu really wanted to pass out. At least if I fainted, I wouldn't be so upset. Actually, Han Jingchen, the sixth prince's concubine, is also here today. The sixth prince was originally a little transparent, so Han Jingchen couldn't make himself transparent. Although I don't really expect to stand out at family banquets, I still need to come here occasionally to make my presence felt. However, compared to Pan Yulu's desperate situation, Han Jingchen was obviously much more cheerful. When he saw Fan Qinjiao, he didn't forget to wink at her secretly. Fan Qinjiao. Look, there is someone who looks like she is about to become a mother. Empress Zhengzi has never been a person who likes to put on airs. Seeing that it was almost time for the banquet, she asked the princes and concubines to go back to their respective homes and find their mother-in-law. Originally, Empress Zhen 11 planned to ask the prince to follow her there, but she did not expect that the emperor actually asked Bai Tu to come over in advance and summoned the prince to go to the main hall where the banquet was held. When attending a banquet in the palace, the order of appearance is still very important. The first ones to arrive were the minister's women, followed by the courtiers. Because it was still a long time before the banquet started, this gap was the best time to develop feelings for the courtiers. Actually, this is something that every prince knows very well. But in the palace, no one dared to go there in advance with such a big fanfare. In the past, only the third prince received this treatment. Now I didn't expect that the emperor actually suggested that the prince go first. Empress Zhen 11 suppressed the joy in her heart and hurriedly asked Bailey Fengming to follow Bai Tu to the banquet hall first. It really felt like being hit by a pie, until everyone disappeared. Queen Zhen 11 still murmured to herself, somewhat afraid to think about it, I really didn't expect it, I didn't expect it. Since concubine Yu entered the palace, Queen Zhen 11 has been counting her days on her fingers. Thinking about how every day seemed like years, Queen Zhen 11 felt like she was dreaming. As she thought about it, Queen Zhen 11's eyes turned a little red. Fan Qinjiao boldly held the empress's slightly trembling hand and said softly, no matter how partial the emperor was to the third prince in the past, the prince will always be the prince these years. As long as the emperor does not abolish the crown prince, the third prince will always be the prince. Don't even think about catching up with the prince, as long as you are careful, life will always get better and better. Queen Zhen 11 nodded, that's what I say, but every step is too difficult. The difficulty is not bad, at least when you stand at the top, you can truly be worthy of yourself and everyone. Queen Zhen 11 stared blankly at Fan Qinjiao for a while, then suddenly broke into tears and laughed, it's hard for you to have such a calm mind at such a young age. Just like Fengming, it's also hard for Fengming to suffer so much. Fan Qinjiao blinked, she didn't understand the words. Fengming was not in good health when he was a child. I didn't want to fight anymore at that time. As for Fengming, he stayed in the East Palace every day. I thought that maybe Fengming was not suitable to be the prince at all, so I thought let's just let it go like this. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 672. Chapter 672 is rarer than anything else. When she thought of the past, Queen Zhen 11's heart ached terribly. That day I went to the East Palace and saw the young Fengming practicing martial arts with the young master. I thought it was a coincidence, but I never thought that Fengming had already started practicing martial arts secretly a long time ago. Such a small person, not afraid of the heat, not afraid of the cold, gritting his teeth and holding on even though his whole body is bruised, I feel heartbroken just looking at him. Queen Zhen 11 sighed. Later, I told him, Fengming, let's not fight anymore, just live in this way. Maybe this is the most correct choice for us, but that kid Fengming pulled me his hand, told me that only by standing tallest can you get what you want most, so no matter how hard it is, he will get through it. Empress Zhen 11 thought that she could really be called a waste at that time. For such a big man, he is about to die after suffering some setbacks, and his life is not as clear as that of his own son. It's just a pity that Fengming had a heart problem since he was a child. Fortunately, I met you at that time. Queen Zhen 11 held Fan Qingjiao's hand, and she was really excited. Had it not happened that I met Fan Qingjiao at that time and place, I am afraid that Feng Ming. Actually, it was also thanks to Feng Ming that when he was ill, he held her hand and asked her to take him out of the palace to Hua's house, otherwise he would have missed it. Fan Qingjiao actually didn't expect that he would meet the queen on that day. Little did she know that the first thing she did after she came back from rebirth was to change her past. In his last life, Fan Qingjiao had always listened to rumors that the prince in the palace died of illness at the age of 14. Fan Qingjiao himself has always believed it. But thinking about the rumors in the previous life that the emperor loved the prince, and even the nonsense that was recalled and remembered after the death of Queen Zhengzi, Fan Qingjiao couldn't find any reason to believe everything he had heard. Perhaps, after the death of Queen Zhengzi, the emperor's posthumous title was true. But whether it's guilt, or fear, it's definitely not the deep love as rumored. And the phoenix sings in 100 miles. Fan Qingjiao was sure that she had met him later, and he had saved her. But at that time, Fan Qingjiao had no way of knowing why he was no longer the prince and what his identity was. It's almost time, we should go. Queen Zhen 11 smiled and took Fan Qingjiao's hand, saying these words to her, and she really felt a lot more comfortable. Fan Qingjiao nodded and followed the queen out of Fenji Palace. What happened in the last life has passed. As long as she seizes everything in front of her in this life. After leaving Fenji Palace, Fan Qingjiao took the initiative to separate from the queen. After all, she hasn't been with them yet. Even if the emperor is a little wary of her and Bailey Feng Ming now, it will only be temporary. Fan Qingjiao never dares to take this principle lightly. Accompanying a king is like accompanying a tiger. Empress Zhen 11 also understood this truth, so she didn't say much and just told Fan Qingjiao to be careful on the road. Fan Qingjiao said goodbye to the queen and walked along the spacious palace road towards the banquet hall. As a result, before she had gone far, she saw someone not far away waving to her. Fan Qingjiao looked at it carefully and smiled. I knew that with your low-key temperament, it was absolutely impossible for you to go with the queen. Why didn't you come out earlier? You were going to freeze to death. When Han Jingchen saw Fan Qingjiao, he couldn't help but complained. Fan Qingjiao looked at Han Jingchen's bulging belly and said with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work." Han Jingchen sighed, "Isn't that necessary?" Fan Qingjiao smiled helplessly, took Han Jingchen's hand on his arm, and led her cautiously forward. Zhang Yulan has been causing trouble for you recently. Fan Qingjiao still felt uneasy when he thought of Zhang Yulan. That woman was someone who would use any means to achieve her own goals. When Han Jingchen thought of Zhang Yulan, she actually laughed. Since I was teased by you last time, she is much better behaved now. She has not left her own yard for a long time. The sixth prince is now full of my heart. Fan Qingjiao nodded, as long as Zhang Yulan doesn't cause any trouble. Otherwise, even if Zhang Yulan was in the sixth prince's residence, he would never really be at peace. By the way, I heard that you are in contact with the eldest princess, Han Jingchen asked softly. Fan Qingjiao raised his eyebrows. Where did you hear about it? When I went to visit my mother-in-law just now, I heard what the palace servants said, but don't worry, they all praised your kindness and didn't say anything bad about you. Fan Qingjiao couldn't tell what the good intentions were in these words. She went to visit Yan Hanbo only once in total. But as luck would have it, the trouble has now reached the palace. This kind of news seems to help her gain popularity and gain favor. But Fan Qingjiao will never forget what kind of temperament their aloof emperor is like. Now that Bailey Fengming is out of the limelight, even more so than Bailey Rongs. At this time, there are rumors that she contacted the eldest princess. No matter what the purpose is, as long as it reaches the ears of the emperor, it will be a disaster. She must be suspected of deliberately trying to win over the eldest princess. As for the person who can do such a thing, you don't need to think about it to know who it is. Concubine Yu is concubine Yu, she can always sort out her mood and move forward as quickly as possible. What's wrong? Han Jingchen looked at Fan Qinjiao and looked unhappy. It's okay, I just thought about the eldest princess. She is pregnant after all, but the current conditions are really bad. Fan Qinjiao is not worried. After all, even if this kind of thing really makes a fuss, it won't cause much trouble. Feng Lang, now concubine Yu sent people to spread such news, it was just to get rid of her. I didn't expect that the eldest prince would end up like this. Speaking of which, the eldest prince is too stupid. He even did stupid things like assassinating the prince. My parents' family just sent a lot of supplements a few days ago. I can't finish it myself, so when I leave the palace, I will send someone to deliver some to the eldest princess. Han Jingchen can't say he likes Yan Hanbo, but if he really hates him, he can't reach it. Now that she is also a mother, she really sympathizes with Yan Hanbo. The most important thing is that as long as she sends people to deliver things, no one can make a fuss about Fan Qinjiao anymore. If you really mean to win over, then she is one of them. Although Han Jingchen didn't explain it clearly, how could Fan Qinjiao not know? Jingchen, thank you. What are you talking about? It's a trivial matter. It is indeed a small matter. But with this kind of intention, it is really rarer than anything else. Han Jingchen smiled and patted Fan Qinjiao's arm, then continued walking forward. As a result, it was at this glance that she couldn't help but smile. Qinjiao, why does the person talking to the prince look so familiar to me? Fan Qinjiao. She looks familiar too. Fan self-study. Her grandfather. Why doesn't it look familiar? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 673. Chapter 673, There is no time when I don't hate it. Even though the reason for today's incident in the imperial study room was suppressed by the emperor, the result is still obvious to all. It was clear that the prince and the third prince were both in the royal study, but the third prince was sent back to the palace and was in confinement. Looking at the prince again, he was summoned to the banquet hall in advance by the emperor. The ministers in the court have noses sharper than dogs, how could they not smell anything? Almost as soon as the prince arrived at the banquet hall, he became the center of attention. I heard that it was His Highness the Crown Prince's suggestion that the 5 princes went to Subay to provide relief. I have to say that His Highness the Crown Prince's recommendation was too thorough. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is wise, just like the Emperor in his youth. I would say that His Royal Highness has been the most emperor-like person since he was a child. The door of the banquet hall was filled with false compliments. Suddenly, an extremely discordant voice sounded among the crowd. I heard that the eldest prince has been living a hard life since he was demoted to a commoner. Everyone knows that the emperor is kind and generous. From this point of view, His Royal Highness he still doesn't seem to be very similar to the emperor. As soon as these words came out, the smiles on everyone's faces froze. Then, I saw Fan Zixia walking out of the crowd with a smile. Everyone looked at Fan Zixia and said it would be a lie to say that he was not troubled. Obviously, Fan Zixia came here simply to make things difficult for the prince. But if it's difficult for you, then it's difficult for you. Why do you have to say such words in front of us? How can we compliment you and continue? Besides, you have no idea why the eldest prince was demoted in the first place. Now you pretend to be a good person and go to the prince to pretend to be a good person. When you kicked your granddaughter out of the house, why didn't we see any sympathy from you? Now he is showing off about repaying evil with kindness. Nonsense. I think so, but I can't say it. No matter how evil the eldest prince may have done, he is still the grandson of the prince. To put it mildly, I'm afraid it will make the prince look weak, but if to put it harshly, some people may say that the prince is cold-blooded and has no regard for his brothers and sisters. Facing Fan Zixiu, who was causing such a mess, even Han Jingchen in the distance couldn't help but said, "Qinjiao, your grandfather is really quite annoying." Fan Qinjiao then sneered. There seemed to be no time when she didn't dislike her grandfather. The banquet hall door, which was originally bustling, suddenly became quiet. Everyone was looking at the prince's face, and whether he was twitching his lips in embarrassment. Bailey Fengming glanced at Fan Zixiu calmly. "I heard that Fan's house has not been very peaceful recently. Instead of caring about other people's affairs, Mr. Fan might as well spend more time on his own affairs." Fan Zixiu, who was still smiling evilly at first, lost his smile in an instant. The ministers present had heard about the incident at the third prince's residence, but because the emperor took action to suppress it, no one paid much attention to it. Now that His Highness the Crown Prince mentioned it so lightly, everyone suddenly remembered, "Yes, I heard that the child from Fan Mansion is still locked up in the palace. By the way, that child is your grandson, Fan Zixiu, so leave it alone." His own grandson doesn't care, but he cares about the relationship between other siblings. "Mr. Fan, are you sick?" Fan Zixiu's old face darkened. The emperor has made his own decision on this matter, and His Highness does not need to worry about it. Bailey Fengming smiled faintly. "Don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you." It turns out that Master Fan doesn't understand this principle. Fan Zixiu. Having said that, if Ruofan Zixiu still insists on the eldest prince, he is clearly stalking him. Everyone looked at Fan Zixiu's old face, as black as the bottom of a pot, and laughed so hard that the corners of his lips twitched. It was Han Jingchen who was standing at the bottom of the steps. He just watched His Highness the Crown Prince turn around and leave, with the hem of his robe flying, and his heart was filled with emotion. "I never realized that His Highness the Crown Prince was so powerful before." Fan Qinjiao looked at someone's nymphomaniac look and reminded helplessly, "Be careful of the steps." Han Jingchen believed that Fan Qinjiao would never watch her fall, and saw that the prince's back was about to disappear in front of the palace. And quickly glanced a few more times. He is also a prince, so how come the one in my family is so different from the prince? Fan Qinjiao sighed. The sixth prince is not bad either. Han Jingchen sighed. Forget it. It was the sixth prince who was walking from a distance with other princes who almost tripped and fell to the ground when he heard these words. When Fan Qinjiao helped Han Jingchen up the last step, Fan Zixiu was still standing in front of the palace door. With their eyes facing each other, Fan Qinjiao didn't even stop for a second, but continued to pull Han Jingchen into the banquet hall. As a coincidence, this scene was seen by other ministers at the door. When they looked at Fan Zixiu again, everyone's eyes showed a bit of sympathy. Everyone is familiar with the term betrayal and separation, but if you can really prevent your grandson from being close to you and your granddaughter not to be seen, looking at the entire main city, you, Mr. Fan, are the first to do so. Fan Zixiu. Damn you, how dare you treat him like air? Air. Fan Qinjiao had no intention of making Fan Zixiu so cheap. Fan Zixiu was able to attend tonight's family banquet, which proves that he has climbed very quickly thanks to concubine Yu during this period, but no matter how fast he climbed, Fan Qinjiao would never give him a chance to jump in front of him. As the time approached, concubine Yu and Yunyu also arrived at the main hall. Not long after, the emperor and the queen also sat down on the main throne. It was a family banquet at the end of the year after all, and the palace officials were overwhelmed with the carefully prepared programs. The princes and concubines sat together with Fan Qinjiao, chatting from time to time, a rare harmony. Pan Yula was the only one who remained silent from beginning to end. It wasn't that she didn't want to laugh, but when she saw the princes sitting across from her sitting neatly, and then thinking about the third prince who was in confinement, she was in no mood at all. In fact, not only Pan Yulu, but also the ministers of the three princes and his party were also very taciturn. Especially when facing the looks of the other princes and ministers standing in line, they were all so ashamed that they wanted to find a crack in the ground and crawl into it. Fortunately, Emperor Yongchang seemed really happy, and the smile on his face did not stop throughout the entire banquet. Fan Qinjiao had been secretly observing Emperor Yongchang. Seeing that the banquet was about to reach its climax, Emperor Yongchang had finished drinking for 3 times, and she suddenly reached out and bumped the wine cup on the table. Click, a crisp sound startled everyone in the hall. Fan Qinjiao quickly stood up and apologized. "It was my daughter-in-law's negligence. Please punish me, father." Emperor Yongchang couldn't blame him for a wine cup. He looked at Fan Qinjiao's face turning pale and frowned, asking, "What's wrong with the princess?" After hearing these words, Fan Qinjiao knelt on the ground. "Father is wise. On the night of the New Year, my daughter-in-law suddenly thought of her younger brother whom she had not seen for a long time, and she felt a little worried. My daughter-in-law knew that her younger brother would not be able to do anything in the palace. It's hard work, but he is just a 1-year-old child after all. I'm afraid he doesn't understand the rules and disturbed his father's purity. My daughter-in-law is here to apologize for her brother and father." These words are extremely straightforward. However, it is precisely because there are not too many embellishments that it appears more sincere. Emperor Yongchang was in a daze. If Fan Qinjiao hadn't mentioned it, he would have forgotten the child. Pan Yulu, who had been silent all this time, suddenly tightened the handkerchief. What is Fan Qinjiao doing? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 674. Chapter 674, Saving the Life of a Brother He Has Never Met. Emperor Yongchang originally had the child brought into the palace in order to calm the restlessness of the people. Although the third prince lost his child, he felt uncomfortable, but as time has passed, and now that he thinks about it, it is actually not that much of resentment. Besides, he had seen the child once when he was brought into the palace. He is as small as a peacock, and he cannot even speak carefully. Emperor Yongchang naturally would not really let a child pay for his life, otherwise what would the world say about him? Concubine Yu felt a thump in her heart when she saw that the emperor's expression began to loosen. If this matter is taken seriously and let go, what dignity will she have in the future? But before Concubine Yu could say anything, Empress Zhen 11 angrily reprimanded her. "The crown princess is presumptuous." Fan Qinjiao hurriedly bent down and kowtowed, as if he was really frightened. Everyone sympathizes with the weak, even Emperor Yongchang is no exception. Especially today, Fan Qinjiao personally delivered the Lingxia pill to him. Even if Emperor Yongchang wanted to get more benefits from Fan Qinjiao, he still wanted to speak for Fan Qinjiao. What is the queen doing? The crown princess just misses her family so much. This time, before Empress Zhen 11 could speak, Concubine Yu spoke with a half-smile. "Hasn't the empress always preferred the crown princess? Why does she change her face so easily now? She knows that the empress is majestic, but I don't know, I thought the queen was deliberately trying to embarrass the crown princess in order to arouse the sympathy of others." Queen Zhen 11 frowned. "Today is a family banquet, but the crown princess's behavior is inappropriate. It is reasonable for me to reprimand the crown princess for being ignorant." Concubine Yu sneered. "Queen, please don't have ulterior motives. As the lord of the sixth palace, I must be the mother of the world. I was heartbroken when I heard about the miscarriage of the third prince's concubine. Therefore, when I was in the third prince's residence, no matter how Concubine Yu handled the matter, I never spoke to the emperor. After a few words, even if Concubine Yu wants to execute the 1-year-old child today, I will not interrupt her. Empress Zhengzi will not stop it, but she will deliberately remind everyone that the child is only 1 year old. People will only resist when they are threatened. The fact that the third prince's concubine had a miscarriage had nothing to do with anyone else. After hearing that the child was only half a year old, everyone's face showed unbearable emotion. Concubine Yu noticed the expressions of everyone in the hall and her chest hurt with anger. What a cunning queen, she knows how to arouse the sympathy of others. Yunyu secretly held her mother's hand and looked at the emperor with tears in her eyes. I don't know, my father, but my mother and concubine have been depressed since they learned that the third prince's concubine had a miscarriage. These years, my father has always doted on my mother and concubine. I have never seen my mother-in-law feel so sad. Every time I have nightmares, my mother-in-law regrets with regret, saying she is sorry for her father and failed to protect his grandson. Emperor Yongchang felt his heart tightening when he heard this. Fan Qinjiao turned his eyebrows and said in a low voice, people cannot be resurrected after death. If Aunt Suhong of the Fan family didn't understand this truth, she wouldn't have beaten the Dengguan drum regardless of her own life, just to use her own life. To atone for the mistakes of your children. Emperor Yongchang frowned, but he remembered how much trouble that Suhong made. If the adults are really allowed to risk their lives, I don't know what kind of trouble will be caused. Emperor Yongchang now has the Lynx Yu pill, and he hopes that the longer he lives, the more popular he will be. It's not a serious crime, but the sixth emperor won't be able to escape with a light punishment. Suddenly, a discordant voice sounded in the main hall. Emperor Yongchang looked over following the voice and saw the prince holding the sixth prince in his arms, half smiling. Noticing the emperor's gaze, Bailey Fengming hurriedly stood up and said, Father, I don't know. Just now, the sixth emperor's younger brother lost the drinking order to my son, who was thinking about how to punish him. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. Now, everyone is looking at the crown princess longingly. Why are you in the mood to drink, prince? But it was these words that made Emperor Yongchang very satisfied. Although it was a support, Emperor Yongchang never reduced his precautions against the prince. But now the prince is clearly telling him through his actions that even if he has received the emperor's support, he will still not overstep his will and not be unhappy, or even interfere with the emperor's decision at all. Emperor Yongchang looked at the prince and remembered what the prince had just said. Helene is out of the question, but light punishment is unavoidable. In other words, death penalty can be avoided, but living penalty cannot be escaped. After thinking about this, Emperor Yongchang's expression softened significantly, and he turned to look at Fan Qinjiao. I heard that your mother had always been giving porridge to the people a few years ago. Fan Qinjiao said truthfully, Mother said that everything I got today was a gift from the emperor. Since I can't return this favor to the emperor, it's better to give it back to the people. I heard that Mother is already recruiting more people, and I plan to wait. We will continue to give porridge to the people after the new year. Emperor Yongchang nodded, there is no need to make your mother go through such trouble. Since Na Suhong is willing to atone for her son's sins, I will punish her to accompany your mother in giving porridge, but she needs to get the rice to cook the porridge herself. And then personally distribute it to the people. If they are found to be speculative and slippery, I will definitely punish them severely. Daughter-in-law, thank you father for your gift. Fan Qinjiao kowtowed with gratitude and hit his forehead heavily on the ground. However, in the invisible sight of everyone, his dark eyes did not waver at all. What may seem like a benevolent move, is actually just an attempt to use Suhong to win over more people for him. Sure enough, selfish people always think about themselves. Now it is a fact that the child in the belly of the third prince's concubine has been lost, so what if she is held accountable? It is better to take the opportunity to turn everything into benefits, and even turn it into a weapon to put gold on one's own face. Fan Qinjiao has seen the emperor's selfishness a long time ago, so he can't say he is surprised now. But looking at concubine Yu, it was obvious that she had some indigestion. Concubine Yu sat on the seat in shock, as if she had lost her soul. Her grandson died just like that, but now the emperor can just brush it off so easily. Empress Zhen 11 had a panoramic view of Concubine Yu's expression and sneered in her heart. Concubine Yu has been favored by the emperor since she entered the palace, so she does not know the emperor's true face. But these years, she has been surviving under the extreme selfishness of the emperor. Now things are really changing, and it's time for Concubine Yu to have a taste of this. When the matter came to an end, the ministers in the hall all raised their wine glasses high and complimented the emperor on his kindness. Han Jingchen gave a thumbs up to the sixth prince while no one was paying attention. Sixth prince. Who I am? Where am I? What just happened? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 675. Chapter 675 The Heartbroken Eighth Prince. The sixth prince looked confused. He really didn't know anything. He didn't even know when he had started drinking wine with the prince. Fortunately, Emperor Yongchang did not pay too much attention to him, because after Fan Qinjiao kowtowed to the emperor, he suddenly looked in the direction of the courtiers and bowed Yingying. Emperor Yongchang was inevitably curious, what is the crown princess doing? Fan Qinjiao lowered his eyes and said, actually, my daughter-in-law did not dare to mention this matter to her father. Just before entering the door, her daughter-in-law heard that her grandfather and the prince said that one should take care of the family ties between brothers and sisters, so she made up her mind. My daughter-in-law has to thank her grandfather for reminding her about this. Fan Zixiu. What does it have to do with him? But now it's no longer Fan Zixiu's turn to say whether it has anything to do with him. After all, what happened just outside the palace was witnessed by many people. The other ministers felt sick and wanted to vomit when they thought about what Fan Zixiu had done when he picked trouble with the prince. No wonder you are provoking the crown prince in a good way. It turns out that you want to stimulate the crown princess to come forward to save your own grandson. It's okay if you don't do anything and take no risks. Now you are still here pretending to be confused and innocent. You are such a bad old man. Concubine Yu turned pale with anger and wished she could slap Fan Zixiu in the face. Is it possible that she has been supporting him so much recently, but she ended up supporting a white-eyed wolf? In this way, Fan Zixiu not only had to face the sarcastic looks of the ministers, but also the cannibalistic looks of Concubine Yu. He was really like Zhu Beiji looking in the mirror, and he was no longer the same person inside and outside. Fan Zixiu, who was curled up on his seat and wished he could disappear on the spot, could only look at Fan Qinjiao fiercely. Fan Qinjiao smiled at Fan Zixiu without hesitation, calmly and calmly. Since you are helping Concubine Yu to embarrass Bailey Fengming, you must be prepared to be struck by lightning. Her husband is not something anyone can step on. The sound of silk and bamboo began again, and the excitement in the hall returned to its previous state. Emperor Yongchang, who rarely saw the prince being unusually pleasing to the eye, repeatedly raised his wine cup to drink with Bailey Fengming across the air. The sixth prince has always been a little transparent and would not care about such things at all. But the same thing felt very different in the eyes of the eighth prince. They are also the sons of the father. In the past, the three emperors were favored, but now the prince is favored. Why has the father never looked at him? Is it because his mother and concubine have a low status? The eighth prince became more and more depressed the more he thought about it, so he simply left his seat when no one was paying attention. The eighth prince's concubine saw the eighth prince leave, and she also knew why the eighth prince left, but she sat on her seat with no intention of moving. Being favored by the emperor is what everyone dreams of. But before dreaming, you must first see if you have the ability to make it real. Seeing the eighth prince disappear outside the palace, the eighth prince's concubine sighed silently. She didn't know when the fool in her family would understand this truth. In the main hall, it was getting dark. The eighth prince had already drunk a lot of wine, but now that he was blown by the cold wind, he became even more drunk. Several palace servants walking from a distance seemed to be discussing something quietly. They didn't even need to wait for the eighth prince to get closer. The cold wind mixed with the compliments of the prince reached his ears. The eighth prince. It's even more troublesome. Walking all the way to a deserted place, I didn't want to walk until I reached the palace gate. Just at this moment, I saw several guards walking inside with a strange woman. The guards did not expect to meet the eighth prince here, and they quickly knelt on the ground to say hello, I have met His Highness. The eighth prince frowned, and then asked, what are you going to do? The guards said truthfully, this person is said to be the maid next to the crown princess. She has something urgent to report to the crown princess. As soon as the eighth prince heard the word crown princess, he suddenly thought of the prince who was being taken care of by his father today. The anger that had been suppressed in his heart burst out uncontrollably. How presumptuous! Who is this person in the palace? You can move around at will. How on earth do you do this job? The guards were so scolded that they did not dare to raise their heads and knelt on the ground in silence. Of course they didn't want to cause trouble for themselves, but news just came out from the palace that His Highness the Crown Prince was receiving much attention from the Emperor today. They also thought that they could not offend the Crown Princess, so they decided to be accommodating. Ningan, who had been waiting at the palace gate for more than an hour, hurriedly knelt on the ground and kowtowed, pleading, I really have something important to report to the Crown Princess. Please be kind to Your Highness the eighth prince and let me see the Crown Princess. Ningan was really anxious and banged her head on the ground. But now, no matter what kind of behavior he did, he couldn't arouse the eighth prince's sympathy at all. Since you are someone close to the Crown Princess, you should distinguish the priorities. Today is a family banquet hosted by the Emperor himself. Now the Emperor is also if she doesn't leave the table, who is your princess? Ningan still wanted to explain, yes, but... However, the eighth prince no longer had any patience. He looked at the guards and shouted angrily, what are you waiting for? Get them out quickly. If it ruins your father's happiness, your heads will have to be moved. Hearing this, the guards didn't dare to delay. They stood up in a hurry and dragged Ningan out. Ninghan looked at the palace door that she had finally walked in, and it was getting farther and farther away from her. Tears of anxiety flowed out, Your Majesty the Eighth Highness, please be accommodating. I really have something important to do. The eighth prince looked at Ninghan's helpless and panicked look, and finally felt a lot more relieved with his angry heart. When the banquet is over, the crown princess will come out. If you are anxious, just wait outside. He said nothing and strode away without looking back. Ningan looked at the eighth prince's back as he walked away, sitting helplessly on the ground weeping. At this time, the lights in the banquet hall were still brightly lit. Another wave of palace servants entered the palace, pouring tea and wine for the sitting masters. Bailey Fengming didn't want to drink too much wine at first, but when he saw that the palace servant was about to pour wine again, he stretched out his hand to stop him. The palace man didn't force it, he just quickly left a few words on the table while picking up the wine jar. Bailey Fengming looked at the gradually fading handwriting and frowned unconsciously. At this time, Fan Zixio stood up and said, in previous years, not only the palace was very lively during the New Year's Eve, but also the palace itself was also very lively. The ministers even heard that this year's New Year's Eve, the people will celebrate in the streets. Listening to this, other ministers also agreed a lot. What Mr. Fan said is true. I even heard that there will be a dragon lantern parade tonight, and the people spontaneously raised long lanterns in the shape of flying dragons. The lamp shows respect and awe for the emperor. Although fireworks will be set off soon, you can see them any year, but dragon lanterns may not appear every year. Besides, you can still see the fireworks set off in the palace even from outside. With Fan Zixio's proposal, more and more people in the hall agreed. Emperor Yongchang unconsciously put down the wine cup in his hand, and it was obvious that he was a little tempted by what he heard. Fan Kinjao sat aside and watched coldly. If there was no previous life, Fan Kinjao would probably believe it to be true. But after experiencing the previous life, Fan Kinjao knew very well that the people who were helping and echoing now were all secret ministers of the third prince. And now this group of people are working hard to instigate for only one purpose. I want to gain favor for Bailey Rongs in front of the emperor. Although Fan Kinjao didn't know what Bailey Rongs had secretly prepared to make the emperor happy, Fan Kinjao knew that no matter what, he could not let the emperor leave the palace. It's just a courtier talking, and it's not easy for Fan Kinjao to speak. However, Fan Kinjao is not worried. How could his adoptive father and grandfather not see such an obvious trick? Prince Heshuo and Hua Yaoding obviously saw that Niduan was there, and they had already wanted to refuse in their hearts. However, just when they were about to stand up and speak, another figure stood up first. Since the people have prepared spontaneously, I think my father can see it with his own eyes. As soon as these words came out, Hua Yaoding and Prince Heshuo were both stunned. Looking at the person who stood up and walked out of the crowd, the two of them obviously looked in disbelief. Even Fan Kinjao was stunned. 100 miles of Phoenix? Why? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 676. Chapter 676 Bailey Fengming's Abnormality. Emperor Yongchang was somewhat aware of the undercurrents surging in the court. Especially the disagreement between Fan Zixiu and the prince was a secret known to everyone in the court. Emperor Yongchang was still a little hesitant at first, but now that the prince was talking, he smiled and said, "I guess there are no new things at the annual family banquet. Even the prince, who never likes to make noise, can't sit still. Well, in that case, I might as well go out for a walk with you." Concubine Yu and Yunyu finally breathed a sigh of relief. They didn't expect things to go so smoothly. However, while Yunyu was still trying to figure out the prince's intentions, Concubine Yu snorted disdainfully. The prince has been a useless person since he was a child. Now that he has gained a little attention from the emperor, he is so happy that he has no brains. He only knows how to compliment and flatter the emperor. In the final analysis, no matter where you look at it, the prince cannot be compared with her son. Of course Queen Zhen 11 knew that her son was not a fool. But if Bailey Fengming really saw Niduan, why did he agree? Empress Zhen 11 didn't want to think too much. The emperor had already stood up, so she could only follow him to change clothes. When everyone saw this, they walked towards the palace gate in twos and threes. Fan Kinjao had to take care of Han Jingchen and had no chance to talk to Bailey Fengming alone. He could only look at Bailey Fengming from time to time, hoping to see some answers. Under the moonlight, the phoenix sings from 100 miles away, with a graceful figure and a graceful and indifferent appearance. From time to time, he was talking to the sixth prince beside him, and occasionally a faint smile appeared on his handsome face, as if he really agreed to leave the palace just to compliment the emperor. Behind her, footsteps suddenly became clearer. Fan Kinjao turned around defensively and saw that Pan Yulu had already walked to her side. Under the moonlight, her face, which was white due to miscarriage, was even more white. Fan Kinjao didn't want to be anxious with Pan Yulu, so he subconsciously speeded up his pace. However, Pan Yulu followed closely, and while the conversation around her continued, she lowered her voice and said, "I didn't expect that the crown princess is so kind and loving, and she even protects the child of a slut." Fan Kinjao frowned, not wanting to put in more effort to guess the name of the Pan Yulu mentioned. Pan Yulu smiled coldly, "I heard that that child is the only male in the Fan family." I thought that because of the unhappiness that the crown princess had with the Fan family, the crown princess would rather hope that the Fan family would cut off their children. It turned out to be Suhong's son. Under the bright moonlight, Pan Yulo's eyes showed hatred, her face was like a female ghost, and she gritted her teeth when she spoke. Fan Kinjao shook his head helplessly. Looking at this look, he must have been tortured by Fan Swinning. I don't really hope that the Fan family will be easy, but I will never bet on innocent lives. Neither Fan Swinning nor Pan Yulo can be said to be good people. It doesn't matter how they want to fight, but when it comes to other people, she would not just watch. That child is only 1 year old and has just learned to walk. Pan Yulo stared, isn't my child a child anymore? If the crown princess is so kind, why doesn't she save my child? My child hasn't been born yet, and I haven't even had time to see the world. No one has ever belittled your child. It's because you are incapable of protecting your child. The person who framed your child is certainly hateful, but now what's the difference between you and the murderer who killed your child? Fan Kinjao's tone gradually faded. After getting colder, Yuluo quickened his pace. Staying entangled with such people is just a waste of her time. Pan Yulu didn't give up and reached out to grab Fan Kinjao's wrist. Fan Kinjao shook off Pan Yulu's hand. If the third princess wants everyone to know, are you willing to take other people's sons to accompany you in order to vent your anger? Pan Yulu said. He froze in place, as if he had been sealed. Of course she wouldn't dare. Because of the child, although the third prince had never suspected her, he had not spent the night in her yard for a long time. He spent all night in that Fan Swinning's yard. Did he really think that she was blind and deaf? Looking at Fan Kinjao, who had already walked away, Pan Yulu hated him to death. No one with the surname Fan is good. Fan Kinjao didn't expect that after not seeing him for a while, Pan Yulu seemed to be a completely different person. But think about it, with Fan Swinning's habit of poking and stabbing, a woman like Pan Yulu, who has been pampered and raised since childhood, cannot cope with it. The people inside the palace were very fast. By the time everyone arrived at the entrance of the palace, the carriage was already ready. Most of the courtiers came here in their own carriages, and now they just happened to get back into their carriages with their families. The others were in one car for the emperor and empress, one for concubine Yu and Yunyu, and one for the princes and concubines with their own princes. Fan Kinjao watched the sixth prince hurried over and handed Han Jingchen to the sixth prince. He watched the sixth prince help Han Jingchen into the carriage before sitting alone in the carriage prepared by the palace servants. After all, there is no big wedding. In front of everyone, both Fan Kinjao and Bailey Fengming have to avoid it. With the carriages of the courtiers in front moving ahead, all the carriages left the palace gate and headed towards the main street. Nearly half an hour later, the carriage slowly stopped. As the courtiers said, even though it was late at night, there were still many people on the streets. The accompanying guards were also worried about drawing too much attention to themselves, so they asked the palace officials to stop the carriage in advance. After everyone got off the carriage, if they wanted to reach the main street, they still had to walk a distance. Emperor Yongchang got off the carriage and took Queen Zhengzi's hand. Queen Zhengzi, you have 3 wives and 4 concubines who pamper you every day in the palace, but when you go out, do you know how to act like a big-tailed wolf? Bah! However, Emperor Yongchang's hypocrisy did not stop Queen Zhengzi from enjoying the scenery. Since entering the palace, she has not walked around like this for how many years? It is ridiculous to think about it. She used to always think about entering the palace, but now she wants to get out like crazy. People, only by walking can you know what you want. Concubine Yu looked at the hands held by the empress and the emperor. Although she was angry in her heart, she was still calm in the end. She lowered her voice and told Yunyu, "This is our last fight today. We must not make any mistakes again." Yunyu nodded and said, "Don't worry, mother, we have already given instructions." No matter where our father goes, he will be taken to the designated place by our people. Concubine Yu thought about the scene for a while, and could only say in her heart that it was a pity. Originally, they planned to give his son a gorgeous ending, so that the prince would be completely trampled into the dust. Unexpectedly, things changed much faster than they planned. But fortunately, she still had a backup plan, so that was it. It can be regarded as saving some room for her son. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 677. Chapter 677, Others Can't But I Can. Everyone watched as they walked, and slowly reached the main street. Even though we were not riding in a carriage, so many people appeared on the street all at once, which still attracted a lot of attention. Bailey Fengming took the initiative to walk to the emperor's side and suggested, "Why don't the emperor and the queen walk in front with their guards, and the rest of the people will follow behind to do their own activities, and then slowly gather with the emperor before returning to the palace." Emperor Yongchang himself didn't want to attract too much attention, "Just do as you say." When other people heard this, they naturally wouldn't move too far forward. Concubine Yu saw that it was the prince who came to make suggestions in front of the emperor again, so she couldn't help but cursed, "He will be in the limelight." Yunyu was still in a daze when she looked at the prince, who was responding fluently and calmly to the emperor. In my impression, the prince has always been very introverted since he was a child. When she went to Fenji Palace to greet the queen, she accidentally saw her father going to Fenji Palace. The prince did not even dare to raise his head when he saw his father. At that time, Yunyu always thought that it was really a pity that the prince had such a good skin. Thinking about it now, she has only been gone for more than a year, and the prince seems to have changed. Even though the prince still acted a little dull in the imperial study today, he was no longer the same person as she remembered him. Yunyu looked at it and saw that the prince had already walked to Fan Kinjao's side. Yunyu narrowed her eyes slightly. Are all these changes because of Fan Kinjao? Bailey Fengming and Fan Kinjao stopped in front of a small stall and stopped moving forward. The emperor has already led the queen away towards the distance. At present, everyone's attention is on the emperor and the empress, and no one notices that the prince is lagging behind. Fan Kinjao was really confused about Bailey Fengming's behavior today. When he saw that everyone around him was almost gone, he asked, "What did you do today?" Before he finished speaking, his wrist suddenly tightened. Before Fan Kinjao realized what was going on, he started running after Bailey Fengming. After bypassing the main street, Fan Kinjao was pulled by Bailey Fengming through the nearby alleys. After passing through an unknown number of alleys, Fan Kinjao saw a carriage parked quietly. Not far away. Bailey Fengming, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke softly, "It's too late to come back before midnight." After speaking, he pushed Fan Kinjao onto the carriage. The carriage seemed to have been ordered a long time ago, and the driver started driving quickly as Fan Kinjao got on the carriage. Fan Kinjao, who was sitting in the carriage, was still in a trance for a moment, when he saw a familiar figure rushing towards him. "Miss." Fan Kinjao was stunned. "Ninggan, why are you here?" Ninggan cried, "Something happened to Madam." Fan Kinjao's heart skipped a beat, but he still comforted Ninggan, "Don't be anxious, speak slowly." Ninghan hurriedly recounted everything. In fact, she did not expect that not long after she was kicked out of the palace by the 8th prince, His Highness the Crown Prince sent someone to find her and placed her in this carriage. Ninggan had tears in her eyes. She didn't know whether it was because she was too surprised or frightened. "I finally got the young lady here." Fan Kinjao looked at Ninggan's crying face and finally understood why Bailey Fengming agreed to leave the palace. I'm afraid that Bailey Fengming had already planned everything from the moment he received the news. Emperors of all dynasties were extremely superstitious. I think Bailey Fengming understood this and did not report Ninggan's matter to the emperor. Otherwise, With the selfish character of the emperor, he would not put himself in the shoes of others and would only blame others for his fault. What's more, if this year is not a year of peace, I am afraid that all the responsibilities will be taken away from him. Blame it on Ninghan, who broke into the palace with bad news. The emperor was angry and laid down millions of corpses. Let alone Ninghan, even the Hua family may not be able to bear the emperor's wrath. Fan Qinjiao now has no time to think about how many spies Bailey Fengming deployed in the palace to be able to grasp the situation in the palace at any time. Now she just wants to see her mother as soon as possible. The driver drove the carriage very quickly, weaving through the small roads of the main city along the way. Both Ninghan and Fan Qinjiao had to reach out to hold the soft couch under the carriage body, otherwise they would really be jolted out. Nearly a quarter of an hour later, the carriage finally stopped at the door of the Sun family's mansion. Sun's mansion is still brightly lit. Fan Qinjiao ran all the way to the backyard where his mother was. The closer he got, the more he could see the moving figures. In the main courtyard, all the servants of the Sun mansion were standing in order in preparation for emergencies. As the heavy door curtain was lifted, several maids lined up and walked out in a hurry. The water basins in each of their hands were filled with dazzling blood red. Fan Qinjiao, who had just entered the courtyard, looked at the scene and his eyes trembled. Because it was too dark and Fan Qinjiao walked very quickly, none of the servants in the mansion recognized him. But as soon as Fan Qinjiao stepped through the door, the daughters-in-law who had been guarding the outer hall all stood up. Fan Qinjiao didn't have time to say hello and asked urgently, "Where are my mother-in-law?" The fourth daughter-in-law, Yafu, hurriedly reached out and pointed to the inner room. "Inside, my mother-in-law is also there." Fan Qinjiao didn't wait for his fourth aunt to finish speaking, but turned around and ran to the back room behind him. At this time, Sun Che was standing at the door. When he saw Fan Qinjiao coming, he quickly lifted the curtain. The moment Fan Qinjiao stepped in, he was hit by the thick smell of blood. In the room, Hua Yuelian, who was still very unconscious, was being held up by someone's legs. Under the bright candlelight in the room, her face and lips had long since become white and transparent, her messy hair was stuck to both sides of her cheeks with sweat, and the quilt covering her body was soaked with her sweat. Tao Yuxian was sitting by the bed, constantly observing the situation under the quilt. There are silver needles scattered around and a lot of medicinal materials. It seems that all the methods that need to be used have been used. Fan Qinjiao's heart tightened as he watched this scene. In the last life, the scene of my mother's painful death suddenly came to mind. It hurts like that. Such pain. It's so reluctant to give up again. I have to say that it was Fan Qinjiao's nightmare, and it was her lingering shadow. With his heart aching so much that he was almost suffocating, Fan Qinjiao took a deep breath, suppressed the pain in his heart, and quickly walked to the bed to observe his mother's situation. When Tao Yuxian saw Fan Qinjiao, he was obviously startled, but he quickly collected his thoughts and said, "I heard from Grandma Zhang that your mother suddenly fainted. She should have accidentally bumped her body when she fell to the ground. The amniotic fluid ruptured due to his stomach, and the amniotic fluid was about to flow in, but this person never had a strong sense of consciousness. If this continues, I am afraid that one person and two people will die." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 678. Chapter 678, Entering the Fan family again. Even if Tao Yuxian, who was used to seeing life and death, said the words "one corpse and two lives," he still trembled violently. Her daughter has not enjoyed many blessings in her life. She finally looked forward to good days, but she is about to suffer this bad fate. Tears flowed silently across Tao Yuxian's cheeks, reflecting her unbearability and even more helplessness. Tao Yuxian knew very well that if he directly opened the belly at this time, the child could still survive, but if the baby was taken out of the flesh and blood like this, the adult would really have no chance of survival. Even if it hurts, it will hurt to death. A doctor does not heal himself, and he who heals others does not heal himself. At this moment, sensibility finally overwhelmed rationality. Tao Yuxian, who has always been calm and self-possessed, looked at his frail daughter and could not say anything like keep the child alive no matter what. Fan Qingjiao's eyes were hot, and his throat could not restrain itself from rolling with waves of soreness. But she knew that every minute and every second now might be the key to saving her mother's life. Biting his lower lip, he let the blood slowly seep out from the corners of his lips. While the pain temporarily suppressed the soreness in his heart, Fan Qingjiao quickly picked up the silver needle next to him, untied his mother's clothes, and used his heart to for the formation I. The silver needles were arranged from deep to shallow, forming a needle array that resembled a plum blossom. Tao Yuxian's eyes trembled, 9 palaces plum blossom array. This formation is uniquely created by the Tao family, and it is also the forbidden formation of the Tao family. This formation is mostly used for people who are unconscious due to excessive blood loss. The formation is first used to protect the person's heart, and then the depth of the silver needle is constantly adjusted to stimulate the unconscious person's consciousness. It's just that if you want to achieve this formation, you must constantly supply human blood to the unconscious person. In order to protect the heart of the unconscious person, this formation requires a large amount of blood. There was once a Tao family doctor who used this formation to save her child, but because of this, she consumed all of a person's menstrual blood, which violated the Tao family's rules, so she was permanently exiled, and this formation was also permanently banned. Now, Tao Yuxian sees with his own eyes the needle array that was banned by his family once again appeared in front of his eyes. How can he not be frightened? She knew very well that with Xiao Qingjiao's character, it was absolutely impossible to hurt other people, so. Just as Tao Yuxian was thinking, he saw Fan Qingjiao taking out the dagger beside him. A cold light suddenly appeared, and blood flowed out of the snow-white wrist. Tao Yuxian was angry and distressed, confused. Human blood vessels divide and combine. If you want to transfuse blood, you must first test whether the two bloods can be fused with Tao's special potion. Tao Yuxian knows from many years of medical experience that even biological blood may not really be able to fuse with each other. Grandma believes in me. Fan Qingjiao faced Tao Yuxian's angry rebuke with a firm look. Maybe other people's blood is not acceptable, but her blood is definitely acceptable. At the same time, Fan Qingjiao also cut his mother's wrist with a dagger, and then used a silver needle to penetrate the skin near the wound along the acupuncture points. As the third silver needle fell, the wound on Hua Yuelian's wrist suddenly jumped visibly to the naked eye. Immediately afterwards, Fan Qingjiao's blood that was originally flowing on Hua Yuelian's wrist was sucked into the flesh by the slightly beating wound. As the blood on Fan Qingjiao's wrist was continuously absorbed by Hua Yuelian's body, Hua Yuelian's face, which was already as white as a piece of paper, finally became rosy. Looking at this scene, Tao Yuxian knew that Xiao Qingjiao's blood could indeed blend with his daughter's. But it is clear that Xiao Qingjiao has never experimented at all, so how can he be so sure? Is it a gamble? Tao Yuxian looked at Fan Qingjiao's dark eyes and quickly rejected the idea just now. Such a determined look could never be a gamble. Could it be? Another answer came clearly to mind, and even Tao Yuxian was shocked. Fan Qingjiao looked at his grandmother's expression and knew that he might not be able to hide it. But now was not the time to explain this. Seeing his mother's breathing becoming more steady, Fan Qingjiao quickly reached out and gently pulled out all the silver needles near his mother's heart by an inch, and finally pulled out the needle closest to her heart. A silver needle pressed 2 inches. The intense pain instantly stimulated all of Hua Yulian's nerves and senses. With a long exhale, Hua Yulian suddenly opened her eyes wide. Tao Yuxian saw that his daughter was conscious, but he didn't dare to delay for a moment longer. He hurriedly checked the situation under the quilt, and shouted to Huayuelian to use more force, and use more force. Perhaps it was human instinct, Huayuelian almost didn't even think about it, and just kept exerting force in response to her mother's voice. I don't know how long it took, until a baby's cry echoed through the sky. Huayuelian's exhausted body fell heavily back on the bed, and she passed out again. It was the people waiting outside the house who started crying when they heard the child's cry. But in the room, Tao Yuxian was still tense with all his nerves. He didn't even glance at the child, but stood up and walked to Huayuelian's side. He quickly pressed Huayuelian's pulse. Although the pulse was weak but still stable, he quickly took out a life-saving elixir brought from home and stuffed it into Huayuelian's mouth. Immediately afterwards, Tao Yuxian stuffed another one into Fan Qingjiao's mouth. The bitter taste made Fan Qingjiao's already somewhat fuzzy consciousness finally sober up. Originally, she wanted to raise her head to signal to her grandmother that she was okay, but as soon as she moved, the world in front of her was spinning for a while. Tao Yuxian hurriedly helped Fan Qingjiao sit on the soft couch beside him. He picked up the silver catgut and quickly sewed it on his wrist, which had become white flesh. Fan Qingjiao was leaning on the soft couch in a daze, his eyelids were very heavy. Although he was still conscious, he couldn't open his eyes, and he couldn't even hear the sounds around him clearly. I don't know how long it took before Fan Qingjiao slowly opened his eyes. The room had been tidied up a long time ago, and even Huayuelian's wrists had been sewn up. Grandma Zhang was holding the infant in her arms and was talking to Tao Yuxian. When she saw Fan Qingjiao opening her eyes, she smiled and said, "Old madam, Miss Wei is awake." Tao Yuxian turned around suddenly, and after confirming that Fan Qingjiao was really awake, he breathed a sigh of relief. Mammy Zhang held the baby in her arms and walked to Fan Qingjiao. "The young lady has given birth to a sister. From now on, the young lady will have a biological sister." Fan Qingjiao lowered his eyes slightly and looked at the swaddled baby. He was small and wrinkled, but he slept extremely soundly. Looking at the new life, Grandma Zhang was a little moved. Today, the eldest grandma of the Fan family came to see the young lady and said some unpleasant things. Now that the young lady and her daughter are safe, let's see how the eldest grandma of the Fan family can survive. Can't laugh out loud. Fan Qingjiao's heart skipped a beat. Who did you say has been here? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 679. Chapter 679, Send you on your way in person. Mammy Zhang just remembered that she had just been busy saving people, and now she quickly told the whole story. However, Grandma Zhang was standing outside the door at that time and had no idea what was going on inside. But these are no longer important to Fan Qingjiao. My mother is 10 months pregnant, but what could be the reason for Ziweiling to come to her house at this time? Looking at his mother who was still unconscious on the bed, Fan Qingjiao's limbs became cold. Mom Zhang, what time is it now? If I go back to my wife, the new year will be over in half an hour. Fan Qingjiao narrowed his eyes slightly. Half an hour is enough. Excuse me, Mama, please help me call Ninghan in, Fan Qingjiao said softly. Mammy Zhang nodded, thinking that her uncle was also anxious to see the child, so she carried the child out of the door. Tao Yuxian seemed to see something, and walked up to Fan Qingjiao and persuaded him, as the saying goes, it's not that you don't retaliate. The time has not come. If you dirty your hands for someone who doesn't deserve it, it won't be worth it. Fan Qingjiao naturally understands this truth. That's why she allowed Ziweiling to wander around the main city for so long. If it were before, maybe Fan Qingjiao really thought his hands were dirty. But now, Fan Qingjiao just wants Ziweiling to pay for his debt with blood. Tao Yuxian saw Fan Qingjie was silent and knew that she had already thought about it, so he stopped trying to persuade her. He just paused and said, "Come to see me tomorrow. I have something to ask you." Fan Qingjie nodded, actually already knowing what his grandmother wanted to ask. While everyone outside was surrounding New Life, Fan Qingjie took Ningguan and quietly left through the back door. "Sit back on the carriage," Fan Qingjie directly ordered the driver, "go to Fan's mansion." Ningguan was stunned. She obviously didn't expect that the young lady would take the initiative to go to Fan's house. In fact, even Fan Qingjie herself did not expect that one day, she would step through the gate of Fan mansion. Huddled up on the soft couch of the carriage, Fan Qingjie's face was pale and his limbs were cold due to the lack of blood. Even with his eyes closed, he was still feeling dizzy. But today's Fan mansion, she is going to decide it. But some things always need to be explained clearly in person to make it clear enough. Some revenge must be avenged with one's own hands. Fan mansion, standing quietly in the night, is still the same as in Fan Qingjie's memory. Fan Qingjie thought that as time passed, she had forgotten many things, but it wasn't until the moment she stepped into the door of Fan's house that she realized that there were some things that she had never forgotten. Looking at the scene in her memory, she could still think of all the injustices she and her mother had suffered in the Fan mansion. Looking at the familiar yard, she still clearly remembered how Ziweiling used all possible means to occupy her mother's yard, her mother's position, and everything her mother had. It was the boy on duty in the mansion who watched in shock as Fan Qingjie walked all the way into Grandma's yard. He couldn't recover for a long time. He had drunk too much and was still dreaming. Unexpectedly, he saw the crown princess coming back. Already. In the room, Ziweiling was sitting on the soft couch and sneered. Suddenly he saw the curtain being lifted. He stood up in surprise and went to check. When he saw Fan Qingjie walking in the door, he thought he was dreaming. Fan Qingjie." Fan Qingjie did not answer immediately, but under Ziweiling's gaze, he walked to the back room, sat huddled on the soft couch, and then looked at Ziweiling again, who was still in the outer room. "If I remember correctly, I just met the eldest grandma of the Fan family outside the third prince's residence some time ago. I don't want the eldest grandma of the Fan family to forget my appearance so quickly. How about I help the eldest grandma of the Fan family recall it? How did the eldest lady of the Fan family get turned away by the nun of the third prince's residence that day?" Fan Qingjie's voice rose and fell, instantly bringing back the memory of Ziweiling's shame. Ziweiling will never forget how Fan Qingjie stepped on her into the mud that day. This is the Fan mansion. I am afraid that the crown princess is not having a banquet and getting drunk in the palace today, but she still thinks that she is a member of the Fan family. How can I remember that as early as the day I entered the Fan mansion, there were many other people in this family? There is no room for the crown princess anymore. Ziweiling, who realized later, was not afraid of Fan Qingjie, this was her territory. Fan Qingjie smiled faintly, but his eyebrows were as cold as ice. "I'm here because I have good news to tell Grandma Fan." Ziweiling looked at Fan Qingjie warily, not believing that she could tell any good news. Fan Qingjie didn't bother to show off his lawsuit to the drunkard. He changed his posture and said, "Just now, my mother gave birth to a daughter. Mother and daughter are safe." Ziweiling took advantage of the situation and changed his expression. "How can it be? She knows better than anyone how hard she used to push Hua Yuelian, and Hua Yuelian fell to the ground belly first, so there is no way she will be safe." Fan Qingjie looked at Ziweiling, "Don't believe it?" Ziweiling bit her lip, "What does Hua Yuelian have to do with me?" Fan Qingjie sneered and said, "I thought that tonight, the eldest grandma of the Fan family went to the Sun family to reminisce with my mother so much because she didn't want my mother to give birth to the child safely. It's just a pity that she still has to let Fan grandma is disappointed." Of course Ziweiling would not admit, "I don't understand what you are saying at all." Fan Kinjao was not angry at all. Originally, the good news of the Sun family should have spread throughout the main city tomorrow, but I thought that the eldest grandma of the Fan family might not be able to hear it, so I came here to inform her. Zy Ling. What does this mean? Before Zy Ling could react, she saw Fan Kinjao suddenly walking towards her. The silver needle between the fingers suddenly flashed coldly under the candle light, and just looking at it was enough to send chills down one's spine. At this time, Zy Ling finally realized the danger. How dare you, Fan Kinjao? I am the eldest grandmother of the Fan family. My daughter belongs to the third prince. If you dare to touch me, the third prince will not let you go. Normally, it would be impossible for me to involve myself because of you, but it was you who gave me the best opportunity. Zy Ling. Today's news about my mother's dystocia will spread throughout the main city tomorrow along with the good news. At that time, the news about the Fan family's grandma going to the Sun Mansion will also spread. When everyone knows that after the Fan family's grandma leaves, my mother is having a difficult delivery, what do you think the people in the main city will think? Zy Ling trembled. You have no evidence at all. Fan Kinjao stood still in front of Zy Ling, the smile on his face became colder and colder. If you are alive, I really can't do anything to you without evidence, but if you die, even if there is no evidence, the people of the main city can't do anything to you. Everyone will think that you committed suicide out of fear of crime, right? Hearing this, Zy Ling's feet softened and he almost collapsed on the ground. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 680. Chapter 680. Tooth for tooth, life for life. Zy Ling dared to go to the Sun family to cause trouble today. The bet was that even if the Sun family and the Hua family wanted to investigate, but there was no evidence, even if Hua Yuelian was really alive, just relying on her one-sided words, the government has nothing to do with her. But now, Fan Kinjao told her that evidence was not important at all. How can Zy Ling not be afraid? Seeing Fan Kinjao standing in front of her like of death, she was scared to death. Almost subconsciously, Zy Ling pushed towards the door behind him. However, the condensed Han who stayed outside had long been blocked to death, and let the drunken Ling smash the door with the strength of the drunk Ling. The closed door was still not moving. Zy Ling has never been so scared as he is now. She never thought that the person who could scare her so much was Fan Kinjao, whom she had never put her eyes on before. Thinking back to when she first entered Fan's house, Fan Kinjao was just a coward who didn't even dare to say anything. Who would have thought that such a useless thing would be driven out of Fan step by step under her own calculations? The things at home could now kill her. What are you doing? Fan Yurong's voice suddenly came from outside the door. Zy Ling seemed to have grasped the last straw and shouted like crazy, "Master, help me. It's just me. Fan Kinjao is going to kill me." Fan Yurong heard from the servants in the mansion that he saw Fan Kinjao coming in. He originally thought that the servants had made a mistake, but now that he heard Zy Ling's words, his heart skipped a beat. "Kinjao, what can't you say? Open the door first, and let's talk about it slowly." Fan Yurong used to be indifferent and disgusted with Fan Kinjao, but now he is so humble. Fan Kinjao smiled coldly. It was indeed the way of heaven that brought reincarnation. Similarly, in this courtyard, she and her mother once suffered a lot of indifference and humiliation. When Zy Ling first entered the house, her good father would beat and scold her and her mother every time he came to the yard. Even if he knew clearly that Zy Ling was lying and confusing right and wrong, all the faults must be blamed on her and her mother. Come on, mother. As time went by, it was still the same yard, but everything had changed. No one knows how long Fan Kinjao has been waiting for this moment. Only she knew in her heart that she had waited a whole life for this moment. Want to save my son or her? Do you want to choose one? Fan Kinjao looked down at Zy Ling, who was leaning against the door, with no sympathy or pity in his dark eyes. Outside the door, Fan Yurong's face turned pale. His mouth was obviously still open, but he could no longer make any sound. Suhong has already told him about her son. Although Suhong is an aunt, that son is the only incense in his Fan family. It cannot be cut off, it cannot be cut off. Zy Ling couldn't hear the sounds outside, and began to panic in her heart. Young master, you have to save me. Since I came to this house, I have been working hard to give birth to your child, how can you be so cruel? Outside the door, Fan Yurong made no sound, as if he was dead. Fan Qingjao was not surprised. Her irresponsible father was best at staring and pretending to be dead. Once upon a time, he watched it so coldly, watching her mother and his heart away from Fan. Now, it's just that the indifference of the past is used on other people. It's just that unlike Hua Yuelian, Zy Ling at this moment does not have such a noble temperament and decent silence. Fan Yurong, please speak to me. You don't have to pretend to be dead for me outside, I know very well what you are. I think I was so blind back then that I thought you would be a good place to stay. Let me tell you, my daughter is now the third prince's wife. If she knows that you are so unsympathetic and cold-blooded, she will definitely let the third prince seek justice. These words can be said to have torn off the last layer of Fan Yurong's face. Fan Yurong, who was still a little hesitant at first, was filled with disgust after hearing these words. Who do you think you are? How dare you yell in my Fan mansion? It was me who was obsessed with you in the first place. This poisonous woman brought me in. Without you, I wouldn't be so depressed that my wife and daughter don't recognize each other today. When Hua Yuelian left Fan mansion with Fan Qingjao, was Fan Yurong really just watching with a cold eye? Of course not, back then he was really tired of Hua Yuelian who only knew how to be noble. That's why he remained silent and allowed the drunkard to oppress Hua Yuelian step by step, forcing Hua Yuelian to leave willingly. But now seeing Fan Qingjao getting higher and higher, and even Hua Yuelian has become Mrs. Jioming, Fan Yurong doesn't know how long it has been since he had a good night's sleep. Fan Yurong has been thinking about how many times he has dreamed back at midnight. If he had not invited Zy Ling to visit him at the beginning, would the glory of the Hua family be able to share a share of Fan's mansion now? Otherwise, he is also a man who has a prince as his son-in-law. Stop daydreaming there. With your temperament that entertains cats and dogs, do you think you deserve to have a successful career? Except for me, who is blind, anyone who wants to marry you will only be even blinder. Zy Ling was lying at the door. He sneered coldly. He didn't have much emotion in the first place, so why was he afraid of breaking his face now? Fan Qingjao. It's really spectacular. Even she didn't expect that the dog-eating dog scene could be so explosive. It's just that a selfish person like Fan Yurong will certainly not consider his own problems. Since you also know that you are a member of my Fan family, you should now contribute to the incense of my Fan family. Zy Ling, who had just tried his best to sneer, instantly froze up. Even though I have thought about it for a long time, I still can't believe it when I hear it with my own ears. Fan Qingjao walked closer to Zy Ling step by step, looking at her twisted face and eyes that were so shocked that she couldn't be more shocked. Her father's selfishness, indifference, all these were something she and her mother had experienced before. Now, I can finally repay the debt in full to Zy Ling. Turning over his palm, silver light suddenly appeared between his fingers. Zy Ling only felt a stinging pain on the back of her neck. Before she had time to struggle, the entire silver needle was completely submerged into her flesh and blood. She subconsciously raised her hand to touch the back of her neck, but before she could touch it, she suddenly fell to the ground. The feeling of suffocation that gradually came over slowly enveloped her. Zy Ling opened his mouth to ask for help, but no sound came out. Seeing Fan Qingjao lift his foot and cross her body, Zy Ling used her last bit of strength to hold the slender ankle. Fan Qingjao lowered his eyes slightly, his condescending black eyes showing no signs of fluctuation, like a pool of stagnant water. Don't worry, it won't be long before your daughter will go down below to reunite with you. Zy Ling trembled all over. Today, she finally understood that the height Fan Kinjao was standing on was no longer within her reach. But even if you know it, so what? Now she has no chance to even say a word of mercy. End of this chapter.